I'm going to introduce our moderator, Samantha Boyd. You've probably seen her on KARK, and we're very grateful that she was able to be here and help moderate this important discussion, something she's covered a lot on the airwaves. And I will kick it over to you and let you introduce the rest of our panel. Thank y'all.
I was going to introduce myself, but I guess you did. Yeah, I cover politics for KARK and Fox 16. I originally was not, I guess, hired to cover politics, but it somewhat becomes addicting. There's just always a story, so I can't escape the Capitol now. I just am there every day. But I actually got to know really everyone on this stage, I guess we could say, well through the Protect Arkansas Act. I think that obviously that's what we're all here to speak about today, and it's something that for us in news was a huge focus. News, as you guys probably know, had such an interest in the Protect Arkansas Act. That Milburns Act was really our focus in the legislative session. So we were looking at that a lot, and then with everything with the Board of Corrections and everything with now the new prison, it's just an ongoing story for us. So yeah, that's kind of been a big deal for us, and so I know it's probably a big deal to Arkansans as well. I assume everyone probably knows who's here. Senator Ben Gilmore, he of course was the sponsor of the Protect Arkansas Act. If you want to add anything, feel free. And then we have Secretary Joe Profiri, I'll still call you Secretary, who now serves on serves for the governor still in the corrections realm.
Clarifying for the record, I'm the former secretary. Current secretary is Ms. Lindsay Wallace.
Yes, but you're still serving for the governor.
Yes,
And then we have Senate President Bart, Hester, who also, of course, worked on.
There's a microphone behind y'all. Just use yours, please.
Okay, I have my mic for my cameraman, so I forget the name too. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry if y'all can't hear me.
Share the venue microphone.
I'll share with him. Yes, and then Senator Bart Hester working with Protect Arkansas Act. So I think that's what we're going to focus on today. I guess I'll ask you guys some questions. I've been wanting to ask you some for sure. So we'll go ahead and get started, and then we'll do the public discussion. And if you guys have questions, feel free. But I think the main thing is we're still seeing the Protect Arkansas Act kind of roll out now. What are the biggest things right now that you think are important for Arkansans to know that are still going into place, and there are things that we need to be watching for?
Well, thank you, Samantha. I appreciate all of your work and helping cover the Protect Arkansas Act and corrections in general. Not on?
I didn't think it was.
Test.
How's that?
Oh,
I knew y'all. Yeah, I can tell. You were missing my voice. There it is.
Let's just restart.
Well, so as Samantha said, I'm Senator Ben Gilmore from Southeast Arkansas, District 1. It covers about 30 minutes south of Little Rock, goes all the way to the Louisiana line. So it's one of the largest Senate districts covering 8 counties in Arkansas. So I was tasked with carrying the Protect Arkansas Act last session. And so, one of the things that we've understood in Arkansas is crime is a problem. It's rampant. We've been seeing increasing levels of violent crime over the last really 2 decades. And that has a lot to do with the state of corrections, the leadership that has been at corrections, thankfully with Governor Sanders and her leadership and people that she brought in like Secretary Joe Profiri and his work, helped sort of get us in a better spot, but we needed good policy to keep moving us forward. Secretary Wallace, who's currently the secretary there, is doing a great job in helping implement a lot of those policies and fulfilling a lot of what the governor has made a priority in her administration. I think not to really go too long and too far into all the Protect Act did, but I think a couple of key components with the Protect Act was making sure that we were ending a revolving door of violent repeat offenders that were wreaking havoc in our society. So it ended that by increasing their sentences, and that was particularly targeted for violent offenders. And then the other really big component of that was addressing a lot of the programming to make sure that we were preparing people to get out of incarceration. And one of the things that we've not done well in Arkansas for a long time is making sure that we are actually rehabilitating people to prepare them for a life outside of prison walls. I think the Secretary will get to some of that in a minute. He has a really great line that he likes to use, and I don't want to get ahead of him on that, so I'll wait and let him use that in a minute with one of the other questions. But one of the things that I think is important, back to the question that Samantha asked, was where are we going now and what are the most important things, I think, from this standpoint of continue to move the ball down the field as it relates to criminal justice policy. And I think it is making sure that we are implementing the PROTECT Act, but not just implementing the PROTECT Act, but making sure that we are striving to improve efficiencies within the Department of Corrections and making sure that we are truly focused on ending that revolving door. And unfortunately, and I'm just going to take a moment here, unfortunately, we have a Board of Corrections that are in charge of running the show right now. Hopefully, we'll get some clarity on that with some court cases. But they don't share our vision, and they don't share the direction that we're trying to move our state. And that's unfortunate because under their watch, we've released about 29,000, almost 30,000 inmates, far too early, I might add, out of prison over the last 2 decades. And that number is staggering. And so when you really think about all the things that are happening as it relates to violent crime in our state, increased drug usage, increase, everything that we're seeing as it relates to, trying to, bring in more jobs and increase economic development, all of those things factor into that. And so when you watch the evening news and you see crime playing out every day, just know that the people who are wanting to look and locate in Arkansas are seeing that too, and that has a real impact on day-to-day life. And so if we're truly serious about trying to continue to grow our state from an economic standpoint, it's good schools and low crime. And I think we're moving in the right direction as it relates to the LEARNS Act. And I know that Opportunity Arkansas has done great work in helping with implementing LEARNS and PROTECT. But it goes hand in hand with good schools and low crime. And so we have to make sure that we're fully implementing the PROTECT Act. And so we need some clarity as it relates to the Board of Corrections and where we're going right now. But we have a prison that's just been announced. We're going to try to move forward on that, and thankfully the board is working with us on that. So I appreciate them doing that. But at the end of the day, the reforms that are still needed to be implemented within the department, we're still having some conversations and a little bit of pushback on that. So that's, I think, sort of where we are, and I'm going to let anyone else jump in on that as it relates to kind of where we are current state.
I think, Senator Gilmore, you did an excellent job of describing the legs of the stool that are required for pushing Arkansas forward on this journey that you talked about, Nick, in your opening statements across the way. Having safe communities, having an educated population, it will create commerce. And corrections is part of a system, and that system has to work as a whole, circuitously, for it to be successful. And if there are challenges within corrections that inform bad outcomes, then there's a ripple effect to community with regards to that. One of the biggest things that we noticed in coming in was a capacity issue. Corrections has done an amazing job. This governor's done an amazing job with passing LEARNS and passing PROTECT and supporting those particular legislative initiatives to inform good outcomes within the state of Arkansas. Capacity being one of those issues that they also have addressed. She's added over 1,000 beds to corrections and continues to add more. That allows for those individuals that have been deemed criminals and been adjudicated by the courts, separate branches of government, to effectively find their way into the incarceral space and do the time that they would need to do. And absent that, then a criminal has no incentive to not be a criminal and generally, and they can operate in community with impunity, which puts Arkansas at a very high crime rate, which informs the larger community of the nation and people that might want to move to Arkansas to be here. They may not want to come if they don't have good schools and they don't have safe communities. And when we talk about the lack of capacity and the backup in the county jails, and that results in the inability to incarcerate offenders and the system not working harmoniously in its design. And so building a prison creates that capacity, adding those beds creates that capacity. And a corrections practitioner doesn't decide who comes to prison, that's the judiciary. So the term that Senator Gilmore was referencing that I like to use is the opportunity of incarceration. As a corrections practitioner, I have a window of opportunity that's been given to me by community for these individuals that have been separated from community to try to make a change.
making that change comes in various forms, but first you have to assess who you have, risk, needs, and responsivity.
Who do we have coming in the system, and why are they here? What are the challenges associated with that individual, and how can I inform a better outcome? If I can give that individual hope to potentially do better by educating them, providing them programs that have good outcomes, and providing them job opportunities upon release, then we're likely to reduce our recidivism rate, which is about 50% in Arkansas. And there's no more expensive citizen in any state than a justice-involved citizen. And so the ripple effect of informing better outcomes for someone who's in prison to not come back to prison reduces or creates the opportunity for us to invest that money elsewhere that we would put in corrections, as additionally to potentially reduce taxes or support the reduction of taxes that we've already enacted. So it is ultimately the opportunity of incarceration. It's very hard to get to prison. Individuals either are significantly violent and need to be separated post-haste from community, or they've had multiple adjudications, and incarceration is just where they need to be. And we need to take advantage of that.
Well, thanks. From a leadership perspective, I sit in, endless meetings, and really at the end of the day, I learned on these issues that you start dealing with circular problems, right? Our county jails are backed up. Why are they backed up? Well, people are making bad choices. All right, well, why can't we move them on? Well, because the state's full. Well, why is the state full? Well, because we can't hire people. Why can't we hire people? We're not paying enough. Right, like you just deal with this circular problem. I was like, we got to stop, put a stop somewhere, right? And the easiest thing for me is like, okay, well, if we can't hire people and it's because of pay, we're about to fix that. We just made an announcement with the new pay plan. We're going to start paying our corrections officers a just salary. And if we look back in a year or 6 months and we're not hiring people from, and we've removed money, then we got to find the next issue. But I'm trying to stop the circular argument. And we all know that our number one priority in government is public safety, right? So we're going to spend whatever money that costs. I like to say all us good fiscal conservatives are hypocrites somewhere. Well, I'm a hypocrite in foster care and public safety, right? There's no amount of money that they can come say they need in foster care that I'm not going to support. There's no amount of money that Joe Profiri can come to me and say they need that I'm not going to support if you trust that they are being responsible with that money, right? I trust Joe Profiri. I trust Ben Gilmore, right? I trust current Secretary Wallace, right? So we're going to do our best to stop those circular arguments. Right now it's focusing on pay so we can hire good people to work in our prisons so that, right, we can get people in there. Because if we agree that, I don't know, you would know the number, 95, 98, 99% of people that go to our jails are going to come out and be our neighbors. We want them to be good, productive members when they come out, which puts a huge responsibility on us to make sure that we are rehabilitating while they're in there.
I don't know how I'm going to do a story on this tonight. I'm supposed to be reporting on this tonight, and you guys have already given me way more sound bites than I need. All super good stuff that I could use any day for a 3-minute package. So stay tuned tonight where I figure out what to use out of all of what you guys have said. You kind of alluded to this, and I was going to wait a minute, but I don't want to bury the lead, obviously, with the interviews. Talking about Secretary Profiri, or former Secretary Profiri, and the issues that you guys have had with the Board of Corrections, I just want to ask you, of course, you came from a history working in corrections, and the governor hired you because of the success you'd had and the history you had in this. First, can you speak on how you feel like that maybe was halted, if at all, by the Board of Corrections? And do you feel like you're still able to get your thoughts and ideas put into place now with the position you're in?
So I will certainly couch any of my comments with there's pending litigation. So yeah, I won't speak in any detail on it. But I do have a history in the space. I started in corrections when I was 18 years old, 4 months out of high school. Just started my 37th year in the business. Have held every uniform position in corrections, been appointed director twice, once by a Republican governor and once even by a Democratic governor before I came to Arkansas. So I have a history and a knowledge base of being in the system. I have family members that are impacted by incarceration, as many of us do. We're not immune from that. So I see the other side of it as well. And coming in and looking at a system holistically to see what we can do, and again, create those opportunities for the individuals. I appreciated that Governor Sanders recognized that and gave me the opportunity to come to Arkansas to inform policy and criminal justice in that space. We certainly did that. We continue to do that. We'll continue to do that. I will find value in whatever space I'm in to contribute to good policy and good criminal justice. And that's what I'll say about that.
Could that possibly be through the Board of Corrections? Would you be able to serve on that at all?
Oh, well, that's not a me decision. And yeah, I certainly think that my space is more in the corrections field. I believe in good governance, and I think that there's good governance from the legislature. I think with an effective corrections board system, you can have good governance, but there has to be openness and willingness to understand the value of change and how culture can be impacted by better outcomes, and ultimately what the impact of corrections is in the system as a whole, not in a silo.
So you still feel like good progress has been made despite what else happened over the last year?
100%. I mean, we are on the precipice of enacting policy that this governor came in expressing that she was going to accomplish. She's created capacity within that facility, irrespective of who sat in the leadership role. We're on the precipice of building a 3,000 bed facility to create the capacity within the state of Arkansas that's been needed for 2 decades. And those policies continue, and they will continue.
I have some more basic questions. You're probably relieved to hear that. I have some more basic questions now for you guys, kind of about, we're talking a lot about kind of addressing the issue, but I want to talk about the issue itself. First off, what is driving higher crime in Arkansas, and what are the root causes that you guys are seeing? Whoever wants to answer.
I think that all of us might have a piece of that, but I think that the legislation that the 94th legislature passed, specifically sponsored by Senator Gilmore with the PROTECT Act, informed and was a message not only to community, but to criminals that you're going to be accountable. You're going to be accountable for your behavior, and there's going to be consequences. And there needs to be accountability, there needs to be consequences. I think that was a very balanced piece of legislation that also said, along with those consequences, I'm going to expect better outcomes of corrections. And that piece of legislation described and expected what those outcomes were. It put together a recidivism task force that Senator Gilmore chaired as well, that took a deep dive into what are we doing in corrections as far as producing those better outcomes, and what do we need to do. There's been programming enhancements with regards to what's happening in prison to inform those outcomes. And I say that because we have a 50% recidivism rate. So 50% of the individuals that are in prison in Arkansas are going to return within 3 years. Well, how do we intercede in that recidivism rate? We do that through good programming, whether it be substance abuse training, whether it be vocational ed, career technical education, or just general education. And then we measure that to make sure that we're being successful, and we tweak accordingly as we need to as we're measuring that. So those things are in place through that PROTECT Act. They will evolve in corrections over the course of time, which will, one, reduce the number of people that are coming back, which presumably is an automatic reduction in the crime rate. In addition to that, just the mere sensation of consequence for an individual. I mean, I got spanked once by my dad. I didn't need to get spanked again. So it's very similar. If you're consequenced and you understand that, then the likelihood of you doing that again, because there's escalation of those consequences under the PROTECT Act, it in large part will cause people to make better decisions, hopefully.
I'll add something. Look, I think, the question was, why do we have an influx of people committing crime? I think the answer is not super complicated on that, as much as we would think. Like, the absence of the father in the home is the direct correlation between someone's going to make bad choices in life and end up in prison. There's no greater, factor in someone's life. And anytime we get away from God's design for the family, you end up with more chaos. God has a perfect design for our families. When we operate outside of that, the odds are not in our favor, and that's what's going on in society. We're moving further away from God's design for a family, having more chaos, people making more choices, and ultimately I lay that responsibility on the man.
I have to say, when I was covering all of the Board of Corrections stuff in recent months, a lot of my friends would watch and they'd say, why do y'all care about this? Like, this just seems like ongoing drama that we can't seem to keep up with. Granted, that's probably not a super great question from people my age, but that was something people asked. And I want to point to what you said. A lot of us have probably family members that have been affected by incarceration. If not, our streets are being affected by that. It's something that I think affects a lot of us more personally than a lot of people realize. And so I'm glad you point to that because it's a more personal issue for a lot of people than I think what it's been, seemed to be. So I also want to ask too, and I believe we've talked about this in the past for victims of these crimes, how are we making sure through the Protect Arkansas Act and through possible future legislation that we're not silencing those voices and that we're still giving them a say in what's going on?
Well, great question. I want to just circle back to what you just said of like why we care about it. I think there's a lot of reasons why we care. We care about the victims. We care because it impacts each and every one of us. It impacts our communities. It impacts law enforcement. I think we all care about the job that our law enforcement officers do, putting their lives on the line every day. And so when you have a revolving door of crime, you're asking oftentimes those law enforcement officers to go catch the same people over and over and over again. In fact, in Ashley County, which is my home county, the sheriff has a binder of over 300 names, a rap sheet on each page of every single person that he's put away that has come back into Ashley County that he's had to put away 2 and 3 and 4 more times. When you think about that and you multiply that out across 75 counties, that's real numbers that's victims, that's impact to businesses, to community, to just the overall economics of each and every one of those communities. So that's one of the reasons why we care. And then I think the other reason we care, if we are true fiscal conservatives, we care about how we spend our money. And when we look at the outcomes we're getting out of corrections, historically have not been great. I really, again, I appreciate this administration, current leadership with Secretary Wallace, former leadership with Secretary Profiri, and the great work that they understand it is outcomes driven, and it needs to be. And if we are spending a lot of money, which we're spending a huge amount of our budget there, then we shouldn't just throw money, expect the same outcome. We ought to expect something different, better, and ultimately we need to understand just how much money it's costing us, not just from a state budget standpoint, but from a societal standpoint as well. Because I think one of the questions I was asked early on, I was on Capitol View, which is part of KARK4, and one of the questions that I was asked was like, well, this is going to be really expensive. What's it going to cost? And my response I said, what is it going to cost if we don't do this? And that's the way we have to think about this issue, because there's a real cost and somebody's paying it somewhere. It's either from a societal standpoint or we're paying it from a taxpayer standpoint. And again, we want to make sure that we're spending our tax dollars wisely, and we should do that. But I think back to your question to victims in particular, what are we doing? I think really I've just sort of outlined that, because if we care about victims, then we care about outcomes, we care about justice, we care about making sure that people who do bad things are held accountable. I think Joe did a great job of outlining the accountability standpoint. And so when someone goes through the process of being adjudicated, and there's a victim, and there's a family that understands, hey, this is what this person was sentenced to, but oh wait, they find out that that's sort of just a smoke and mirrors and it's a joke because of the way our system works, and someone's that's sentenced to, a particular crime, take sex assault 2, for instance, that's really a 1/6 crime under our former system, meaning they're going to serve a 1/6 of that sentence. I don't think the average victim or their family or anyone in that process actually understands what that means. And so I think that when they realize, when that person gets out of incarceration and they're back in their community, I've gotten the phone calls. I can't tell you how many phone calls I've gotten. It's been more than 10 of a person that has called me and said, hey, I just ran into somebody that committed some horrible, heinous act, and I sat next to him at the Cracker Barrel in Alma. How is this possible? And you have to explain to a grieving father in what that particular case that this individual had killed his daughter, and it wasn't first-degree murder. It was I think second degree, and they were back in their community, and he had dinner at another table adjacent to that person. Now, you think about the cost on the impact on their families, and what does that mean in real world? And so I think with the PROTECT Act, you're going to see a difference, but it's not just having good policy, it's having policy that's well implemented. And that's why we need people at the helm that can implement that policy. I think, again, Secretary Wallace is doing a great job right now in doing that, and she's got a really tough job. I think Joe knows well, if anybody here, how tough of a job that is, making sure that you're implementing policy and dealing with all of the politics surrounding that, and then dealing with people who may not share our vision and the administration's vision as the members of the Board of Corrections. And so you're having to navigate that space. But that's why good policy matters, and that's why good personnel matters in pushing that policy.
And I think Senator Gilmore makes a solid point with regards to the revolving door and how quickly people can find themselves out of prison and what the impact of that is on victims and victimization and re-traumatizing victims when they didn't really know through the prosecution phase that even though someone got a 60-year sentence, they may only do 6 years of that sentence. And there are countless examples of that, much like what Senator Gilmore described of sitting next to somebody who you thought was in prison and got out of prison. I had plenty of opportunity serving in the role to see victims come in and testify before the parole board to try to waylay a premature release of someone who victimized them. And one stands out significantly, and it will live with me forever, which was a juvenile female who was sexually assaulted by her uncle. And so her mother had to bring her there. She was still a juvenile, suffered paralysis as a result of her abuse from her uncle, which, is clear that is her mom's brother. So you have this familial effect of re-victimization and re-traumatization of victims that is continuous with the revolving door in a date uncertain sentence. And under the previous system prior to PROTECT, there was a very much a date uncertain system. And so victims would come to the parole board to try to pray to and compel the board to keep the person who likely needs to remain in custody because they haven't had enough time to modify their behaviors or enough birthdays to age out of their behaviors to try to compel them to keep them in prison. And then you have the aspect of not enough prison capacity, so there's anxiety with the parole board of helping manage that capacity through parole. And that creates a lot of harm to community. And I think the work that's been done, the PROTECT Act, the capacity and the policies that have been implemented by Governor Sanders go a long way to fix that.
I have a follow-up question. So say they get out, because a lot of times they do, then what do you do to make sure,
one, these victims aren't, in danger and other people aren't in danger? How do you then, once they're possibly out, make sure that they're not going back to prison and that this isn't a continuous problem?
So the PROTECT Act has a victim's notification expectation in it as well, so they become aware of the release. And if there's any, protective measures that they need to take as a result of the release of this individual, they can engage in that preemptively to the release. And additionally, hopefully they don't learn of the release by sitting next to them at the Cracker Barrel. So they have an opportunity to process that and reduce the trauma that might endure with that. Going back to the question of victimization is if you take the opportunity of incarceration to try to make a change in the behavior of an individual while they're in that timeout from society that we've decided that they need through effective education and programming, and then you invite community into prison, as President Hester said, 95% of these guys are coming back. They're going to be your neighbors. So if you give them potential opportunities and understand prison for some people may be the safest place they've ever been. It may be the first place they've been where they weren't hungry. And so if you take that time in that space where they're feeling safe and they're feeling not hungry, and you invest in them to produce better outcomes. If they're not literate, mandatory literacy, get them educated and get them able to read and write. If they don't have a high school diploma, get them in school, get them educated, get them a high school diploma. Move them to career technical education, vocational education, get them a trade, get them a craft, and then partner with community. And I've seen a lot of community partners in the room that are clamoring to partner with corrections to provide better outcomes for the incarcerated. And you make those connections post-incarceration upstream while they're in prison, then the likelihood of them being successful when they get released from prison are far higher than just opening the door and letting them out.
How does the Protect Arkansas Act do that? Because I know that's been a focus for you guys.
Well, I think one of the big things to point to that's very tangible in the Protect Act was the ending the practice of using the Emergency Powers Act to just let out thousands of people. And that was the practice for years. And what that looks like is when I use that number of 29,000 over the last roughly, actually it's less than 20 years. It was more like 15 years. And when you hear that number, that's what was happening. It was the use of the Emergency Powers Act saying, oh, we're sort of hitting an arbitrary threshold of capacity, so we're going to let out 1,500 people this week. And they were doing that time and time and time again. And so you can't expect better outcomes in community, and you can't expect better outcomes for victims, and you can't expect justice for victims when that is your policy. If that's your policy, because you want to keep some sort of arbitrary capacity number in your prison. I mean, credit to Secretary Profiri, when he came on board, I think he said pretty clearly, it's my job to keep bad people away from good people. And so he worked really hard to find bed space and increase capacity that had been consistently lowered over decades. And so that's one real tangible way to account for victims and the victimization that they've endured by really bad people. So I think, again, it's not fun to talk about, but that is a really harsh reality of policy that we've seen implemented.
Either of you senators might want to answer this, but we've seen, or at least we've seen on the news anyway with some of my stories, there's been pushback on the new prison that's set to go in. I know capacity has been a huge issue for you guys. This has been a huge priority. What do y'all say to that criticism? And, why is this so important for you guys, and why is this something that everyone needs to get behind?
Well, look, I certainly have empathy for anyone if I've got a fourth-generation family farm and a prison's going in next to them, right? Have empathy for that. But we also, again, the number one responsibility of government is to keep people safe. We've got to have a new prison, and we've got to put the prison somewhere where there are people that can work at the prison. If we put it near the other prisons, we already know there is not the population there anymore to staff those prisons. So we've got to go somewhere close. I advocated that it went somewhere near Northwest Arkansas. Why? Because if you're an 8-year-old little girl, little boy, you have a parent that makes a bad choice and is going to be put in prison for 8 years or 6 years, and they go 6 hours away, we know the economics of usually those situations, that child's never going to get to go see mom or dad. Mom or dad lose relationship, that child loses relationship. If we can get a prison near Northwest Arkansas, maybe a neighbor, maybe the parent that's still at home, maybe a school teacher can take that child to visit mom or dad every now and then. Keep those relationships. It's healthy for the child. It's healthy for the person that's doing their time, hopefully reforming them. So it's absolutely necessary that we have the beds. Absolutely necessary, in my opinion, that we put something near Northwest Arkansas for those victims, the children of parents who made bad choices, so they might have a shot at continuing a relationship.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, just to add on, I think that's certainly a really great perspective, and I think the other thing that was somewhat articulated was the fact that you have to put a prison where you can staff it. And right now, all of our prisons are in areas where, frankly, very little population exists in those counties and those communities. And so labor shed is always important. The economics of where a prison locates is always really important, and making sure that we have solid infrastructure. And so all of those things have to factor into that decision making. And so when you're trying to staff a 3,000 bed facility, you've got to have the people there that can do that. And so you're not typically going to build another prison right next door to another prison where it exists currently. So there's a lot of things that factor into that. And again, very empathetic to and sympathetic to the people that maybe don't want that in their community, and totally understand that, because I think it's never anyone's dream to have a prison built in their community.